Hey everybody, this is Jacob from the Story DevRel team, and in this video, I'm going to be talking to you about cross-chain royalty payments to IP assets. Let's dive right into it. This is a high-level diagram that shows each step of the process. Now, let's actually start from square one. This could be on any chain, right? Let's say you're on Ethereum, you want to pay an IP asset that exists on Story with ETH token, right? With mainnet Ethereum. So in this example, let's say you're on any chain. This could be Ethereum, Solana. In this example, it's going to be ETH. We're paying with 0.01 ETH, right? Now, we're going to use deBridge to perform that swap. Now, for those of you that are maybe not familiar, deBridge is a application that allows you to swap tokens cross-chain, right? So in this example, I could take 10 ETH, right, and swap that to wrapped IP token. It gives me a conversion, right? Just a simple swap. Now, in this example, we're going to use deBridge to perform that swap and get to 5 wrapped IP token, which is what we need to pay IP assets on Story. And once that happens, then we can do the whole traditional, royalty flow where we do pay royalty on behalf, and then it flows up the entire IP graph here, as you're seeing, and pays out to IP assets. In this example, this is like a parent and child IP asset. One is a remix of another, all that fun stuff. But how does this actually happen using deBridge's protocol? Well, again, we're using deBridge to perform the swap, but then, we're using what's called a DLN hook to make this call on Story after the swap is complete. So if we go to their documentation, again, we can see that deBridge hooks, or otherwise known as a DLN hook, is an arbitrary action that we can execute after a swap is completed. And so, again, in this example, that hook is going to be this pay royalty on behalf, that will pay up the royalty chain once the swap is complete. So let's just go ahead and dive right into code. But before we do that, I want to talk to you about this API call, this create transaction API call, that will help us actually construct this, swap and execution to pay royalties on Story. So this create transaction API endpoint basically allows you to input a bunch of parameters here. So let's say we're originating from Ethereum. We're going to pay in ETH token. But then the destination chain is, let's say, if we scroll down here, Story, and we're going to pay in wrapped IP token, right? So, you'll click on the wrapped IP token, whatever it is. This is just some like dummy, parameters here, just given it's like a web UI. But this is the API endpoint. And so this API endpoint, if we were to execute this, right, and we put in all of our parameters, let's say, we're originating from Ethereum, we're swapping to Story, we want to swap over 0.01 ETH, etc., it's going to return back a response that contains transaction data to actually run that transaction and make it happen, right? So the API endpoint itself is not what is executing, the action. Obviously, that would need to happen on chain through a transaction. It's going to give us back the transaction data we need to run that transaction. So what I've done before this video is actually create a test here in Solidity code that kind of demos this sort of API call and returning back that transaction data. So in this test, let's just skip down a bit. We'll see this is the main test here, right? And this is testing cross-chain royalty payments, but really it's testing, constructing and executing that API endpoint. You'll see there's 3 steps here. There is building the royalty payment hook, or really building the DLN hook, building the API request, executing the API request, and then finally just validating that the API response was actually legitimate. So if we go down to the first step, right, this is building that DLN hook. Now remember, again, DLN hook is like an arbitrary action we can attach to this API endpoint. Actually, if we were to scroll down, we can see at the bottom, I believe, DLN hook. Again, this is an arbitrary action we can perform after the swap, which in this case is going to be pay royalty on behalf that will, make revenue flow up the entire IP graph, right? So if we go back to our test here, you'll see exactly that, right? That the DLN hook we're constructing is pay royalty on behalf. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Is this pay royalty on behalf with the IP asset ID. This is the IP we're going to pay. We're going to pay with wrapped IP, and the payment amount, if we scroll up, you'll see is going to be 1 wrapped IP token. Okay, so that is building a DLN hook. Now we need to attach that DLN hook to the API request, and so we're going to do that with this function right here, build API request. And again, this is that same API we just looked at, right, with the Swagger here on this UI. We're just doing that in the smart contract code here, right? So we're building that request here. We see the source chain is Ethereum mainnet, which is just ID 1. The destination chain is Story mainnet. The token we're swapping to is wrapped IP. The token we're swapping from is native ETH. and the amount that we're swapping to is the payment amount, right? Which is again one wrapped IP token, and then we include some other variables here. Now remember, you can also submit this from Solana, any other chain that deBridge supports, right? So pretty cool. And you can see here, we're also including helpful parameters like prepend operating expense so that, it's sort of like adding on the additional expense of the operation, right? So we don't have to do some like mathematical calculations around, oh, how much, am I actually paying to that IP asset, etc. And then, again, most importantly, we're attaching that deal and hook that we created in the first step right here through this deal and hook JSON object. Now, once we do that, we're going to actually execute this API call, right? And that's very simple, right? It's just that we're using, we're doing that in our test here using this execute API call function, and then we're validating the response, right? That it contains an estimation, transaction, order ID, and more data. So if we go to our, terminal here, I'm going to execute this test, and we're going to wait a few seconds here, and it will, first of all, show the API response that we get back, which contains the transaction data and all that, and also the request, just so that you can see sort of how it was constructed in code as well. So let's hope to the demo gods that it works. Okay, perfect, it does work. So if we scroll up here, we can see this is the API request it actually executes, right? So dln.dbridge.finance, right? This is all right here. And then the API response, right? So in this API response, we can see, if we scroll down, here is the, here's, actually, wait, where am I looking? This should be, sorry, it's up here. So the transaction, right here, here's the value and here's the data, right? This is the transaction data that we can actually execute on mainnet Ethereum to perform this swap and then pay royalties to that IP asset. So again, we can actually, if you want to, you can go ahead and check out, I believe it's integration guidelines, and then it's, actually, no, it should be, where is it? API. Oh yeah, submitting an order creation transaction. You can see here, again, this is, what we just executed after the API. You get back that data, right, which we're seeing right here. This is all the data. This is the value, and the to parameter is also right here. These are the three things we need, right? And then we could go ahead and execute that on mainnet Ethereum. Now, if we were using Solana, it actually would return back the just one data field, which is the, what's it called on Solana? I think it's a, encoded transaction. I forget what it's called on Solana, but there it is. The versioned transaction, right? So you could run that on mainnet Solana as well. So if you're curious to learn more about this, I definitely would recommend checking out this test that we have here. You can do that by going to developers. You go to smart contracts and then click on completed code. You can actually see the whole boilerplate here, and you can test a lot of different things with Story. But if you go to the test file here, you can see there's a deBridge hook example that I just ran right here. And also, if you want to check out a tutorial for this entire thing that I've been talking about, you can go to royalty, cross-chain royalty payments, and this actually walks you through step by step everything you have to do. Most of it you'll actually recognize from what I just showed you up until step 4, which is actually executing that transaction on mainnet Ethereum. So again, we're taking that transaction to value and data, and sending that transaction on mainnet ETH, and then it would pay out to IPs on Story. So again, thanks so much for watching this video. I hope it interested you in cross-chain royalty payments, and I guess made you aware that it is possible. If it interested you, please let me know. And if you have any questions, also do let me know in the comments. So I will see you again next week for another video. Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend.